Hello and welcome to Outspoken Arts, the Paisley Suite. We're going to have a conversation today with the writers of Something in the Air, Zoe Strachan and Louise Welsh. Welcome. And with Stephen Thompson, who's the producer of Outspoken Arts and of the Paisley Suite. So I think my first, do you want to say anything before we start? Either of you? Or shall we just get into it?
Just the traditional thank you for this opportunity.
Good. So Stephen, I suppose it's over to you first. If you can tell us a wee bit about the inspiration for the monologues and the brief that you gave to Zoe and Louise, that would be interesting.
The characters emerged out of a period of consultation that we did for Renfrewshire Council for the Paisley 2021 City of Culture bid. We had been travelling about meeting local community groups, and particularly groups of older people, some in care and some retired care workers. And what began to emerge from about 5 care workers we met were a sort of core stories or key stories of people who had, some tragedies, some great humour in their lives or great careers, and others who were really isolated and lonely and suffering quite a lot of change in the care system, particularly where care workers used to go in and be there for half an hour doing a bit of hoovering, a bit of cooking, a bit of chat, and they would be there regularly with the same care worker. But that all changed about 10 years ago, and care workers were reduced to literally a tea and a tuck. And some, older people were being put to bed at 5 o'clock at night with cocoa and pills. And all of these stories, the people began to react against this. And from the care workers, what you got was lots of pithy stories of how people coped or didn't cope. And what began to emerge was an idea that these were a bit like Alan Bennett's Talking Heads. They were Paisley stories of older people, full of resilience, full of humour, and a bit of tragedy as well. And although initially in the commission we had an idea of 2 of the elderly women, one was a former thread mill worker and one was a spinster. Zoe and Louise took this character in a different direction, really, and rather than have a Baby Jane story, which we all recognise and know really well, and is quite a common tale of older sisters living together, what we ultimately got was almost a brand new character, from right out of the 1970s, who was jet-setting and dynamic and had a very different story to tell. And actually, it was a great story that had, great relevance to COVID-19, about how we all felt about lockdown and trying to escape. And I think what we got ultimately in that commission was a very different approach, which I really appreciated.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And we'll move on to the next question, which is for Zoe and Louise. Having been given the brief from Stephen, what inspired you to create Sandy and her life story?
Well, we've worked with Stephen previously. We worked with Stephen in Glasgow, and it was just such a joy to come back. And Stephen gave us really fantastic core material, which did inform. It really did inform what we were doing. But as Stephen knows, we take it and then we absorb it, and then you have to own it. So as Stephen said, we went in a different direction, but we wouldn't have this character without the field work that had already been done and the testimonies and the discussions that we were generously given. So we didn't throw it away, but we did take it somewhere else.
Yeah, we definitely haven't said goodbye to the Baby Jane idea, but I think under the circumstances of writing, things were pretty bleak, and we really wanted to go in a more humorous direction, keep the sadness, I think everybody was feeling at the time, but we wanted something that was a lot more upbeat and a lot more positive. Still a bit camp, if we can say so, but I think we knew that Stephen wouldn't mind us bringing our own take to it and turning things on their head a little bit.
And one of the things that we got from the testimonies, and which quite frankly we have from our own lives, because you know we live in a very busy community. We know people that are older than us, we have older relatives, and we have people who are entering into the care system in different ways. And we know that these are not people that were born old. You're not suddenly born at the age of 70, 80, 90. These are people that have rich and dynamic lives. They know a hell of a lot. We can really learn from them. And they've had a lot of fun, and they've had a lot of sex, and they've had a lot of transgression, and they've had a lot of parties. And then suddenly, often within the media, we see people reduced to little old men and little old ladies that drink cocoa, and who, quite frankly, you know, are often they're often portrayed as if they were part of the Second World War, whereas actually what they were part of was part of a sexual revolution. And that's, you know, that's particularly, I would say, true of queer people. And the other day I heard a discussion with people in care homes, and they said they come in and they sing to us songs from the Second World War. Now, we were part of, we were with the Rolling Stones, you know. Why do we want to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow? So we have a character who, as Stephen said, is very, very active in the 1970s. That's when she comes of age, and when she comes of sexual awakening. And shall we say what her profession is?
Oh, I think so.
Yes, I think that's fine.
Well, when she started out, she was called a trolley dolly, but by the time she was more advanced in her career, she was definitely cabin crew.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things we were thinking about Paisley too. You know, we were looking through all the materials that Stephen had given us and thinking about our own experience of Paisley as a town. And one of the things that we thought was maybe underrepresented is that there it is. It's, you know, Paisley's there with the biggest airport in Scotland. It's the place that's the most connected of anywhere else. It's the place where you can, you know, you can wake up in Paisley and end up, you know, anywhere in the world.
Yeah. What really intrigues me is your process. You obviously co-wrote this, and how did that process work? Who did what?
I think I talked about owning an idea, and I think when you collaborate, both parties, both writers have to completely own the idea and own the character. And so we begin pretty much like this, actually: cup of tea, cup of coffee, and a lot of talking, you know, chat. And then we, like everybody else during COVID, we were doing the walk home, I called it. Every time you went out, you were just walking home, and we would chat then. And so a lot of discussion is how it begins, a lot of note taking, maybe a little bit of disagreement occasionally.
It's certainly down a few research rabbit holes of looking at cabin crew message boards and watching endless airline advertisements for the 60s and 70s. I think when we're writing, we're both sort of control freaks, and writers are anyway. And with a monologue, obviously we couldn't take a line about, or, you know, our we've collaborated before in fiction where we've been able to do things like that. This was a real kind of working through every line, every word together across the table.
But also imagining that world, you know, what would the world of the Paisley trolley dolly, as they were called, and then later on cabin crew, what would that be like, to be a part of that world? And it seems that people, airline crew back in the 70s, they had a lot of fun. They had a huge amount of fun. They were subjected, the women were subjected to a massive amount of sexism, huge, you know, people assuming that they know a lot about them, and assume, even when you see the adverts kind of suggest that these women are just there to serve, and they're very sexualized adverts. And so that's interesting as well, because how did those women, I was going to say those women on the ground, those women in the air, how did they feel about that? How did they respond to that? Well, I do not think that they all took it kindly. You know, they knew they would be responding to these men that were pinching their bottoms and things, and worse. So there was a lot of very contemporary themes. You know, the Me Too movement, the idea of lockdown, which we'll talk about later, that idea of how do you operate as a woman in the world? How do you operate as a lesbian within the world? And in Paisley, in the Paisley airport, the flying industry as it was back then.
Fantastic, fantastic. We'll just pause there for a minute. Is that all right, Stephen? Yes. Excellent, excellent. Okay, let's move on. You know, you've already raised some relevant issues that are covered in the piece, and I don't think they're covered in a heavy-handed way. I think it's all done with a very light touch, and I just love the character of Sandy. She's such a positive role model, and I don't know about you, Stephen, but I felt that we needed to see a woman in her 70s who was not a victim, you know, who could stand up for herself and speak for herself. And I think that works really well. Yeah.
I think the aspect of the character that really jumped off the page for me, apart from her initial outing herself, was when she said why she was a trolley dolly, that she just needed to escape Paisley, to fly around the world to meet people and fall in love and have adventures. And it's something about that small town experience that a lot of LGBT people experience, that they need to get away from Paisley or get away from their small town and the small minds that surround them. And that was like a universal cry. As soon as I heard that, I thought, hooray, you know, she's flying around the world and she's having loads of sex and she's really enjoying herself and what a great job. And I thought that's such a celebratory feeling, and we totally recognise it from our own youth. So I think that was a really empowering aspect.
I'm glad that
it moved her away from being a servile hostess to a strong, independent woman making her own choices. So that was a very empowering moment.
Oh, thank you. She is sort of up and away.
Yeah.
She also loves Paisley, you know, and she does stay attached to Paisley Airport. So she's got that thing. I often think of that amazing Jimmy Somerville song, you know, Small Town Boy. Yeah. Often you have to leave. To be yourself, you have to leave. But she also in a way stays because she's flying regularly out of Paisley.
And as you know, I think as an older woman, she's still got all these qualities, exactly as Mary was saying. It's not that she has been transformed into someone else. She still likes learning new things, meeting new people, doing new things, you know. Those are all still part of her personality. It's just that in the play, when we meet her, she's at a bit of an accident and is house, and in the position of having very grudgingly to allow somebody to, you know, to help her out with a bit of care.
I think no, carry on, Louise, that's fine.
I was going to say this is a potential problem that a lot of LGBTQ plus people face. What happens when you get older, if you do, like Sandy, have an accident, or you know, you suddenly become infirm? Do you have to go into a closet that you were never in the first place?
Yeah.
You know, suddenly you're dealing with people you don't know who they are. We know that bullying unfortunately takes place in institutions occasionally, and so are you suddenly back in a closet that you were never in the first place? And that's a dilemma that Sandy's briefly faced with, and I do love that she's got this indomitability. You know, that she reminds me of my older relatives. You know, I don't think that a lot of the old women I knew actually needed a stick, but they liked having a stick because you filled with sticks.
It's also interesting that she's flexible enough. I suppose it's the survivor in her, when she is taken to the hospital, that she can play the wee old lady in order to get things that she needs, you know, so she knows how to play that system.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, she's had all that training being nice to people in the airlines. So, but I think these things are, you know, during lockdown, I'd been in hospital briefly for an operation, and the staff were lovely, you know, and just incredible. But I did think of that kind of vulnerability that you have, even not as somebody Sandy's age, and that kind of reticence as, you know, as somebody who's out in every aspect of their lives, you still hit that moment where you think, oh, I'm not sure if I want to bring this up just now. And it's very uncomfortable, even when you're full of morphine. So, you know, there was a wee sort of personal edge, I think, for me when I was thinking about Sandy in that position. How would she behave? Would she, you know, would she be very open, or would she think, oh, I know, I'm just going to click back into my professional Sandy and, you know, be nice and charming, and hopefully they'll bring me a bedpan if I need one.
And we know that we're living in a society right now where I think, unfortunately, we're told over and over again that there are generational divisions. And of course, generational divisions always exist. They always do. But actually, when we're working on the ground, when we're operating in our day-to-day lives, those generational divisions are not so apparent. But I'd been listening to Radio 4 and I heard a young queer man say, well, the previous generation, they were lucky because they never had to worry about identity politics. They never had to worry about all of this. And you think, oh, for goodness sake, you know, the things that people went through, the exclusion, the not, you know, the law, the fact that you couldn't be a queer man until, what was it, 1982 or something, and
in Scotland,
yeah. And this is beginning to be lost a little bit. And so we wanted Sandy, who is out and proud and in her 70s, and who went through a lot, you know, and who carried a brick in her handbag, and who went to all sorts of marches and protests and took a lot of shit, and is still here and is still fighting, and she can order her Deliveroo curry if she needs it, you know. And we need to have solidarity, you know, between the age groups, because divided we're weaker than we are when we're united.
Oh, definitely. You know, and she does have, you know, she's catching up. Terms change, people's lives change. She's somebody who's in the process of, you know, learning from friends, you know, what is happening with people now. But exactly that, you know, I think it's, when we think about all the things that, especially the pandemic's brought out about inequalities in society, or things that we knew already, reading about more often, you know, ageism's this, I think, is still this awful spectre that's there. And we both work with new writers a lot, and you see the difference sometimes in people creating an older character that you sometimes want to say, but remember, anything that you've thought at 21 or 30, believe me, somebody at 70 or 80 has. They've probably thought it, they've probably done it, and they're very unlikely to be shocked by it. You know, it's not really life experience.
I think it's great that she can work her phone. She knows how to order Deliveroo. You know, she can record her answers for the questionnaire. She's not giving in to things, thinking I'm too old to learn stuff like that. You know, she's up on technology, which is fantastic and encouraging, you know.
It's such a help to anyone that's got any kind of mobility problems. Technology, if you can work it, can really be your pal, can really be your friend. And I think something else that we've noticed during the pandemic, of course, how could you not notice it? The idea that older people or people with underlying health conditions are somehow dispensable. And this is something really that we all have to fight about. You know, when you think about it, the process of being alive is an underlying health condition. We all, if we don't have one, we're going to get one later on. And the idea that sectors of our society are disposable and not worth bothering about is really offensive, and something that we have to battle against that. Absolutely. And that we wanted to make Sandy, who is a battler, you know, she's a fighter, and she will keep on fighting. You know, maybe she'll be fighting soon with a Zimmer, who knows, but she'll still be fighting.
Yeah, that's great. I'll stop there on this question. Thank you. Stephen, if you want to think about it for a minute, I'm going to ask you the question about what we learned from Sandy.
Wow.
Okay.
I think to reflect on some things that Louise and Zoe said earlier is that she's a bit of a class fighter. You know, she's a class fighter for lesbians everywhere. That you don't have to just rely on the care system, you can actually rely on the carer. And you know, that what I loved about this piece was the hint of the relationship with the carer, where she was really, you know, really warming to her really nicely. You know, it wasn't the usual carer kind of antipathy where, you know, oh God, it's some awful person coming in for 10 minutes. She had bonded with this carer, and that's often the story that doesn't get told, that, you know, older people, when they become isolated for whatever reason, through health or illness or through death or whatever, when they have carers imposed on them, suddenly these become really important people in their life. They're more important than the postman, more important than the, you know, the repair guy or the councilman. It's the person they see every day, 3 times a day sometimes, and that new relationship becomes super important. And I think, you know, really seeing Sandy, although she's sitting there with a broken leg and a stookie, she's not suffering. You know, she's got a lovely Parisian decanter beside her, almost full to the brim, and she's not, you know, not going without anything. And I think that's a great thing to remind people of, that you're not tucked up by a fireplace singing war tunes from 1945. You know, you actually can still have your life. So I think that's the really important thing, that life has to go on, and you have to cling on as much as possible to your standards and your values and your expectations, and not let them go just suddenly because you've turned 65 or 70 and you're supposedly retired from need. You know, we still all have needs, and our needs need to be met, and Sandy has needs.
She certainly
does. But I think, is it not also the case that she is of value herself, and she has that self-value, and other people can value her? You know, I think that's an important thing to remember. And quite often, if you're isolated, you feel as if you're not of any worth to anybody else, where we all know that you are. Yeah.
I think it can be a constant battle to be seen. And I think, you know, I'm sure this is the case for older men too, but I think especially for the older women, that they begin to be unseen, and you have to battle. And sometimes humor can be your friend here as well, because when you make people laugh, they see you. But yes, the just not giving in. We're not there yet, so we don't have to worry about this yet. But to the future.
I think it was you that said this to me, Stephen, that the first time you watched it, you didn't want it to finish. You wanted to find out more about Sandy.
I mean, it's one of those things where you write a monologue and suddenly you have a whole backstory that you want to know more of. You know, you can imagine her going into much more detail about some of the parties she went to, or some of the trips that she took, or you know, more. You want the juicy details, don't you? And that's a good thing for a character, to leave you wanting more. I mean, what I especially appreciated, despite all the difficulty of lockdown, was being able to record them theatrically as a theatre piece, where unlike as the many millions of Zoom monologues in bedrooms or couches, that you were getting a different experience, and you were drawn into this theatrical setting that reminded you that this is still theatre, and it's going to have a different impact from a sofa monologue. So I appreciated that aspect of it. I think having an actress like Anne-Louise Ross, who is obviously a television actress as well as a stage actress, that the gravitas that she brought, in fact, probably some of her most impactful stuff was the swearing. It was quite ubiquitous and unexpected, but totally, that was her character. She would tell you when to F off, and you knew it. And I really appreciate the strength of the character in that regard.
My goodness, how lucky we are that you managed to get Anne-Louise Ross for our play. I was just so excited when you told us and you know how much a fantastic actor brings to everything. And you know, we've missed theatre so much during this time.
Yeah.
And we see how adaptable theatre is, how, I don't know, endlessly creative, and how much we need it, actually, how much we need it in our souls, you know?
Absolutely. And it's she's such a great storyteller, isn't she? You know?
I mean, she did that wonderful thing of drawing out things that we didn't really know were there in the script. Again, just, you know, with your direction, but just with these lovely, subtle expressions and shifts in mood. It was such a pleasure to see.
Oh, it was a pleasure to work on, I have to say.
Oh, she must have been fun to work with. That's my regret. You know, I've got many regrets about the pandemic, but one of them is that we couldn't just come and be in the rehearsal room with everybody. And you know, often people don't want the writers there anyway, because they do get in the way.
Well, you know what? That was one of my regrets, was having to rehearse on Zoom, because it just wasn't the same, you know. But we managed to do it. And it was great having time with the actors before we did the filming.
Yeah.
Albeit a day, but but it was a whole different experience, which I really enjoyed. But they will be theatre pieces, won't they, Stephen?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what we've achieved, is a great calling card for a show that you will definitely want to go and see, because just as Louise says, you want to be in the room with Sandy. You want to be raising a glass, you know, as she whirls off at the end, you know, in her next adventure. And I think that's what's quite exciting. There's definitely more here, and you know, the intimacy of having a live audience will just give that extra edge and extra chutzpah. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I do love also, though, the filmed pieces are different from live theatre, aren't they? And we were talking about this earlier, the way that we can really be close to somebody's face, so we can really see that subtlety of expression. So we have some advantages as well, and for everything that we lose, there are always gains too, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It would be nice to be in a room with Sandy, though. You know, we were writing her when we were not able to have drinks with friends. Nobody was, you know, so I think that was part of wanting to create a character that you wanted to spend an evening with. You know, you wanted to hear her stories.
Yeah, and you spoke about her having a life before, Stephen, and I also think of her having a life after, you know, that we see her for this glimpse, and then we know her leg's going to mend, she'll be out in the town again, with all her style and pizzazz. And I love that idea of the character walking out of the room and into the real world, even though we don't see them.
I'm sure that our first journey will be on a plane out of here, like most of us.
It's so nice to see you both, and I do hope that we can get to hang out in some way. And Stephen, thank you again, because I know this has been a long journey,
5 years this one.
journey. So thank you so much for sticking with it.
But thank you very much for your writing and for creating such a wonderful character.
Oh no,
it's been a pleasure,
you know, for
honestly.
Stephen, for doing so much with
it. And what nice, as Zoe said, what some lovely journeys we went down on these message boards.
Oh, you should see them. They're fascinating. So, nervous flyer, the drinking.
But these older, well, they're old now, but these usherettes on the message board, there's some
the Caledonian Airways reunion page. Oh.
So the advert was right. They all want to be Caledonian girls.
Yeah, especially the nerds.
Oh my God.
A lot of them dress up as Caledonian girls.
That's another monologue.
I know.
So they keep writing themselves these shows. Oh my God.
Oh, lovely to see you.
Thank you so much, everyone.